As you can see, you can change the subject to several different topics. You might want to move the conversation toward work, or to recent events, or to travel plans, or if you think you've talked a lot about yourself, you might want to change the topic to the other person. So, as we've seen, conversation flows from topic to topic and back and forth between people. But what about ending a conversation? What do you say when you want to draw it to a close? Well, all you need is some kind of excuse or reason for leaving. Maybe you need to use the restroom or make a phone call. And when you give your excuse, you can introduce it with something like, I should, or I need to. Let's practice some examples of ending a conversation. Once again, repeat the examples after you hear them. Ready?
It's been nice chatting, but I suppose I should go find my seat.
It's getting pretty late, and I should really be heading home.
If you'll excuse me, I just need to make a quick call.
Well, I shouldn't leave my husband sitting there alone for too long.
Okay, now how about listening to how ending a conversation works in real life? Let's listen to the end of a conversation between two people chatting at an office party.
So, you live here in the city then?
Yeah, in Delgado.
Is that right? I've got a cousin in that area. Pretty nice.
And convenient.
Indeed. Lovely place. Well, Shelley, it's great to talk, but I've got to go and freshen up and find a table. Maybe run into you later.
So, did you hear how that worked? Amber said she needed to freshen up, which is a nice way for a woman to say she needs to use the restroom. And she started by saying, it's great to talk, which we often use to indicate that the conversation is coming to an end before we give an excuse to leave. Now it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but we'll beep out the end of the conversation. You can fill that in yourself by saying it was nice to talk and then giving an excuse to leave. Ready? Here we go.
Is that right? I've got a cousin in that area. Pretty nice.
And convenient.
All right. Now that we've looked at how to end a conversation, it's time for us to end this lesson. Besides learning how to end a conversation, we've looked at some ways of keeping it going by showing interest or changing the subject. We'll be back soon with another 925 English lesson. Until then, so long and happy learning. You're learning with 925 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. In today's lesson, we are going to have a look at how to talk about your family. In business and in life, everything is about relationships. And to build relationships, we often talk about our background and our personal life. Of course, you can't get too personal. but family is a topic that everyone loves to discuss. For most people, family is the reason they work so hard in the first place. And believe me, if you ask someone about their family, they'll feel good. Better yet, if you remember what they've told you about their family, they'll feel great. And if you show interest in someone's family, they'll probably show interest in yours. So how can you answer questions about your family? Well, children are always an interesting subject. If you've got kids, you'll surely understand. So, you can simply say how many children you have. You don't have to give too much detail, but you could mention whether they're boys or girls and how old they are. Or you might just say, 2 young children, or a teenaged son. Now, if you don't have children, you might just mention your spouse, which means your husband or wife. Or you might want to keep it really general. I mean, you could say something like, I come from a big family. And you might add something about where you're from or where you live. In this way, you're giving people an idea of who you are. How about a bit of practice talking about your family in these ways? We're going to give you some examples. After you hear each example, try repeating it yourself. Ready? Let's give it a go.
My wife and I have 2 boys aged 16 and 18.
Well, it's just my husband and I here in the States.
I've got a big family back in Edinburgh.
We've got 2 young children and a 3rd one on the way.
So when people ask an open-ended question about your family, they're probably wondering about your immediate family. That means your husband or wife and your kids. People don't want to know about your distant cousins. But people might ask about your parents or your family background. What exactly do you think people might want to know? Well, your parents' jobs may be interesting. So you could say something like, my father is a doctor and my mother is a teacher. If that sounds a bit boring, then how about mentioning some special accomplishment? Like, my mother invented a new type of car tire. Okay, maybe your mother didn't invent a tire, but it's just an example of interesting family history. And besides special accomplishments, sometimes in your family history, a particular job is common through different generations. In that case, you can say you come from a long line of engineers, for example, or a long line of salespeople, or whatever job it is that runs in your family. Now, what if the family has a business? Well, you can tell people what type of business, and you could even mention how long your family has run that business. These kinds of details about family, especially their jobs or business, are interesting to people. And they might also make you look good. I mean, if your family has been successful in business, people will naturally think that you've got talent too. Now, it's your turn to try using these expressions. Just like before, you'll hear some examples. After each example, you can repeat what you hear. Let's begin.
My dad is an engineer and my mom is in education.
I come from a long line of military folks.
My father worked at the first VW plant in Mexico.
Our family has run a clothing store for 3 generations.
So, did you hear how that worked? There were some interesting details in those examples, right? And notice that we say run a business, which just means to operate a business. Now that we've practiced some of these expressions, let's hear how this sounds in an actual conversation. We're going to listen to Anne asking John about his family. And John is going to talk about his children and his family in the U.S.
So, is it just you and your wife here in Paris?
No, we've got our son and a daughter with us.
Oh, that must be nice. But I imagine you miss your family back home.
I sure do. I've got a pretty big family back in the States.
How did that sound? John mentioned his son and daughter and his big family back in the States. We can use that expression, back in, to talk about the place we originally come from. Now, it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out John's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember, first you'll mention your kids, then you'll say that you have a big family in the U.S. Here we go.
So, is it just you and your wife here in Paris? Oh, that must be nice. But I imagine you miss your family back home.
Okay, so that's all for this lesson. We've had a look at both talking about your immediate family and talking about your parents or family background. And that wraps up our series of lessons on talking about your background. By now, you should be comfortable telling people about where you're from, your education, your career, and your family. Until our next lesson, so long and happy learning. Business Skills 360, the podcast that looks at the other side of business English. Hello, and welcome back to the Skills 360 podcast. I'm your host, Tim Simmons, and today I want to talk about how to get the most out of a conference. The digital age has changed the way we communicate and build relationships. And while it's great to be able to connect with someone on the other side of the world by email, phone, or chat apps, face-to-face contact is certainly not dead. In fact, in this hyper-connected world, face-to-face contact is even more valuable, and one of the best opportunities for FaceTime is at a conference. Getting the most out of a conference begins before the conference, when you plan your trip. In many cases, you'll have the option to stay at the conference venue. If so, it's worth it, and if not, then stay as close as possible. You don't want to miss out on any action because you're spending time getting to and from the conference. And there's lots of informal networking opportunities that can happen spontaneously around the conference location. You want to be able to capitalize on those opportunities as much as possible. Conference preparation also means having an early look at the agenda or lineup of talks and deciding which ones you want to attend. You might choose based on the topic or because you want to meet the presenter. But don't pack your schedule. Leave some time open for a tete-a-tete with a prospect or a potential partner. Now, you've probably seen people at conferences ducking out of presentations to take phone calls or madly sending emails during breaks. Don't let that be you. If at all possible, carve time out of your schedule to be truly present at the conference. Let colleagues know you'll be busy so they don't inundate you with email. You've probably also seen people racing around trying to locate a phone charger or apologizing because they don't have any business cards on them. These are definitely things to avoid. Come prepared. Make sure you have all the tech and business cards you might need. So, imagine you've done all you should to prepare, and you show up on the first day at the registration table. You get your name tag and your conference package, and now what? Well, I'd like to share some do's with you today, and in our next lesson, I'll go over some important don'ts. What kind of do's am I talking about? Well, my number one suggestion is to get out and meet people. If all you want is information or learning, then you can do that online or in a class. A conference is one of the absolute best networking opportunities around. So don't be shy. Be the first to break the ice. Be the first to break the ice. Other people will appreciate it. That conference room is full of potential customers and collaborators. Go find them. Be personable. And in every conversation, try to establish a personal connection or something in common. That might mean a place, an interest, a mutual acquaintance, or an opinion on one of the speakers. Speaking of speakers, it's a great idea to use the topics of their talk or workshop as a starting point for a conversation. And one thing you should do that will help you absorb and process what you learn is to take notes. Don't assume you'll remember everything you hear. Taking notes will also help you ask good questions at the end of a talk or presentation. That's one way you can stand out, make an impression on people, and build a connection with the presenter. Asking questions is part of a more general bit of advice. Participate. That doesn't just mean in workshops or sessions. You should also be engaged via social media by posting on the event's website as well as your own. It also means getting involved in social activities after hours. A lot of great business is conducted and relationships built at the pub. But let me give you one don't in advance of our next lesson. Don't overdo it at the pub, especially early in the conference. If you have so much fun that you miss half the next day, you're wasting an opportunity. Okay, I've talked about the importance of good preparation, staying close to the action, and making sure you have everything you need so you're not scrambling during the event. I've also given you some advice for during the event, especially around networking, taking notes, and participating in everything the conference has to offer. Tune in next time, and I'll cover some things to avoid and talk about some important conference follow-up activities. That's all for today. If you'd like to test yourself on what we've just covered, have a look at the businessenglishpod.com website. There, you'll find a quiz about today's show, as well as a complete transcript. So long, and see you again soon. Business Skills 360, the podcast that looks at the other side of business English. Hello, and welcome back to the Skills 360 podcast. I'm your host, Tim Simmons, and today I want to give you some more tips for getting the most out of a conference. Some people see conferences as a way to get away from the office for a few days and take a break. And sure, it's helpful to step back from the daily grind and learn something, or reflect on your work and business. But if you really want to get the most out of a conference, you should look at it as more than just a learning opportunity. I mean, if you've got hundreds or even thousands of people in one place looking to connect with others, it's a golden opportunity for networking. In our last lesson, I talked about conference preparation and gave you a list of things you should do during the conference. Today, I want to give you some tips for after the conference and share some don'ts or things to avoid during the conference. My first tip is to not attend every session. Don't feel like you're missing out if you linger in the lobby or the hallways while others are in a workshop. Some of the best conversations happen outside the meeting rooms when you've got some space and quiet time for really good discussion. And this ties in with another thing to avoid: rushing. Anytime you're in a hurry, you're closed to networking. So if you're having a great conversation with a potential customer and you realize the presentation on soft selling is about to start, don't dash off. Skip the presentation and focus on the opportunity at hand. Now, I realize that conferences can be intimidating. We've all had that experience of walking into lunch on the first day and scanning the crowd for someone we know, like a colleague or coworker, someone safe and familiar. But safe and familiar is why we go home at night, not why we attend conferences. So don't glom onto one person or your colleagues. That's a waste. You need to spread yourself around. So, at lunchtime, don't look for familiar people, and don't park yourself with a fellow wallflower. Instead, look for interesting, outgoing, or influential people. Ask them if you can join them, and get involved in the conversation. After all, getting involved is what it's all about. You need to appear open for business, so to speak. And to do that, there are a couple of other things you should avoid. For one, don't spend too much time on your phone checking email or calling the office to see if the photocopier has been fixed yet. That's not why you're there. I realize it's tempting to pull out your mobile anytime you have a spare minute. But here's a challenge for you. Every time you want to look at your phone, talk to someone new instead. This is not to say that your phone is useless. In fact, I'm about to tell you how you should use it. But first, here's another don't. Don't focus too much on business cards. I know that sometimes you judge your networking success by how many cards you got. But quality is more important than quantity. Besides, you can easily lose business cards. And then what do you have besides the memory of a face? So if you've made a good connection, ask instead for the person's mobile number or email and plug it directly into your phone.